Hello everybody and welcome to today's session. So we've come to the next part of our webinar series. So I'm guessing a lot of you are already part of the SalesIQ family. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. So Zoho SalesIQ is excited to be hosting another informative and engaging webinar for all of you. In this one, we'll focus on how Dialogflow can be used with Zoho SalesIQ Zobot to respond to your customers on the website and your mobile apps in natural language. I'm Michelle from Zoho SalesIQ and I'm going to be keeping you engaged for the next 50 to 60 minutes, alright? So jumping into building a Zobot with Dialogflow. What is Dialogflow? It is an end-to-end build once, deploy everywhere development suite for creating conversational interfaces for websites, mobile applications, popular messaging platforms, and IoT devices. It's a powerful tool that lets you create conversational interfaces without the complications of having to handle natural language processing. It provides natural language processing and natural language understanding services. So you can use it to build interfaces such as chatbots and conversational IVRs that enable natural and rich interactions between your users and your business. So in case you're on the lookout to build a command-driven bot using Zoho SalesIQ, Dialogflow is one of the platforms that you can use. So it allows you to create extremely conversational bots that talk to your website visitors like how a human operator does. And not only do they offer conversational options, but also you can write code using the fulfillment feature. So you have webhooks and the inline editors inside the fulfillment section where you can write your own code if you want your functionalities to be more specific. So basically your fulfillment editor can be used to make logical decisions, computational actions, and also to access external services. And there's also custom payload where you can use Zoho SalesIQ's input and display cards to display to your website visitors. So you can build your bot agents inside Dialogflow and then integrate it with the SalesIQ platform and deploy the Zobot on your website to assist your website visitors. So in this webinar, we'll be talking about what Dialogflow can do on the SalesIQ platform. So I'll tell you how this platform in the Zobot works. So when a visitor lands on the website and matches the trigger rule that is set, a configured welcome message will be displayed by the Zobot to your visitors. And then when the visitor responds with a message, the intents configured inside Dialogflow are checked if they match with the visitor's message. That is the content in the visitor's message. When the intents match, Dialogflow will start collecting the missing parameters and then it will start checking for fulfillment configurations. So in case there are no fulfillment configurations, then Dialogflow is going to respond to the visitor's query with default responses. In case the intents do not match, Dialogflow will respond with a fallback intent. Then following this, the fulfillment scripts will be executed inside Dialogflow and the responses are returned to the Zobot to be displayed inside the chat window to your website visitor. So don't worry if you're new to the platform. It's okay even if you're completely new to all of the concepts that have been explained here. I'll be talking about each of them in detail during the later parts of the webinar. So Dialogflow supports many root languages that can be used for the main development of your agent. So as an agent can support up to 15 languages at a time, which is pretty amazing. This way you can make your customers feel at home and also establish your global market presence. In a nutshell, you can see how much general traffic your bot is getting. You can see a list of the most matched intents and also some basic conversational journeys, all right? So this gives you a good sense of whether people are using your bot, when they're using it the most, and what they're really using it for. However, until you have a large user base, this is not extremely or 100% powerful. So you have the privilege to use not only plain text but also rich text responses inside Dialogflow. You can use SalesIQ's input and display cards inside the custom payload section as well. You can provide dynamic responses using webhooks and fulfillment scripts. You have logs that can help you keep track of training and access, and then you have Small Talk, which is a fun little addition to the personality of this bot. So this adds a whole lot of pre-made intents to very similar popular intents like what's up, how's the weather, etc. And then the Dialogflow bot will respond to them with a set of random answers. So you can just turn this on, and you also have the option to customize some of these answers. So in case you're looking to create a completely conversational bot that gives your website visitors the feel of talking to an actual human operator, that is a chatbot that talks just like your human operators, then you have Dialogflow at your disposal. So let me show you a demo of a Zobot that was built using the Dialogflow platform. All right, let's go back to the website. So this is a website that was designed for a hair salon. So this Zobot right here was built using the Dialogflow platform, and is going to help users and is going to help visitors with knowing about the prices of services that are offered at the hair salon, fixing appointments, and telling them about the working hours of the salon, etc. All right. So I have landed on the website, and since I have matched the criteria set for the trigger, I have been triggered with a welcome message, and the bot is asking me how it can help me today. All right, so I'm going to ask it about the services offered. So it looks like the bot is responding. The typing status is displayed here. Alright, so it's giving me a list of all of the services that are offered. So let me ask about the price of women's haircut. Alright, so there's advanced, basic haircut and hairstyling. So it's giving me a list of the prices for all of the separate services. Now let me ask it about the salon working hours. So the main intention of designing conversational Zobots is that you can ask these Zobots queries in any different manner. All right, the question doesn't necessarily have to be complete. You can either say what are the salon working hours, or just say salon working hours, but the bot is still going to respond to you with the same answer. All right, so here it is, the working time for the salon. Right, so let me say I need to fix an appointment. It's asking me for my name, so let me give it my name and my email address. And about the location, right? So it's asking me when I would like to book my appointment. Let me say today. And the time probably 11 a.m. So great, it has booked my appointment for me, and it's also given me a confirmation message. All right, so right here inside the chat window, I also have the option of connecting to a human operator. So your visitors can connect to operators in your organization at any point during a conversation. Now I'll show you how to set up the Zobot. All right, let's go back to the SalesIQ portal. So this is my Zoho SalesIQ portal, and here I'm going to navigate to settings, Zobot, and then click on add bot. All right, so I'm going to give my bot a name and a description. And I'm going to choose a website to deploy my Zobot on, and following that I will have to choose department. Following which I'll have to set visitor type, the type of visitors to whom I want to trigger messages to. So I'm going to stick to the default condition, all visitors. And then I'm going to schedule when I'm going to trigger my website visitors, followed by working hours for the Zobot. And again, I'm going to stick to 24/7. And I'm going to set the bot typing status to immediate. I'm allowing handoff, and I'm configuring some handoff text. And finally, I'm just choosing the platform. So the first step in setting up the Zobot is Dialogflow authentication. So you need to connect to Dialogflow using your Google account and create bot agents inside Dialogflow. Once these agents are created, you can connect them to the Zobot platform inside Zoho SalesIQ. Then you'll have to configure the trigger responses using the JSON format. So let's look at how to do these inside the portal. So before you start creating agents inside the Dialogflow platform, you need to authenticate the Dialogflow platform by using your Google ID and username and your password. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now I can go to my console and start creating agents. So a Dialogflow agent is a virtual agent that handles conversations with your end users. It's a natural language understanding module that understands the nuances of human language. So Dialogflow translates end user text or audio during a conversation to structured data that your apps and services can understand. So you design and build a Dialogflow agent to handle the types of conversations that are required for your system. It's similar to a human call center agent. You train them both to handle expected conversation scenarios, and your training does not need to be overly explicit, all right? So agents also serve as a top level container for settings and data. So to create a bot agent in Dialogflow, you will have to access the Dialogflow console from the SalesIQ portal, or you can just directly log into your Dialogflow platform. Dialogflow portal. On the left side of the window, you'll see the list of bot agents. You can reuse agents that already exist, or you can create a new one based on your requirements. So when you create a new agent, you will have to give it a name. You'll have to configure the default language and time zone for the agent. While we're still talking about the date and the time zones, I want to mention something important. In case you're using any date or time widgets or cards inside your Dialogflow platform, then these are going to work only based on the time zone that you set here. So I'm going to set this to English and GMT plus 5:30. All right. So all agent-related menus and information are found at the top of the left sidebar menu in the Dialogflow console. There you'll see the list of agents associated with your account and also the option to create a new account from where we had reached here. So once your agent is created, it's going to look like this. So every agent that you create inside Dialogflow has a default fallback intent and a default welcome intent that are built in. You can create additional intents as per your requirements. So you can also delete agents in case you want to. So you must have owner or admin access in order to delete an agent. So before we dive into the platform, it's important to understand all of the different concepts that tie together to create the conversational agents that we create. When I started exploring the platform, I jumped right in without knowing what was what. So in this webinar, I'm going to quickly run you through each concept to help provide some foundational understanding for the platform. So there are 4 major steps involved while creating a Zobot using the Dialogflow platform. First, we will be matching the intents inside the visitor queries, and following that we'll be collecting missing parameters. Then we'll return default responses or custom payloads, and finally we will be executing fulfillment scripts. We are going to create a bot that is skilled to answer questions that are put in any format, and this is going to be possible using natural language. So let's look at how to do this using the Dialogflow integration. So this is just a quick example to help you understand what intents are. So let's assume that we're creating an agent for a hair salon, and let's assume that we're going to create 3 different intents, one for checking services available, one for scheduling appointments, and the other one to get salon opening hours. So intents are used to define what you want a bot to respond with when it picks up the intention of a user, or when you want to trigger a response based off of some other event. Basically, if a user says X, we want our bot to respond with Y. That's what it is. So these intents are examples of what users might say to your agents during a conversation. So they're mainly constituted of training phrases that are used to train your bot agents. So these training phrases consist of keywords that might match the keywords from the user's messages. These are the phrases that users say that the bot understands as a certain intention. A number of different phrases can actually describe the same motivation for the phrase, all right? Say for example, I need to find someone, I'm looking for someone to help me, and can you help me find a person, are all utterances that imply the same meaning. They mean the user is intending to find a person. It's best to have around 10 different phrases in one intent as a good base for the natural language understanding engine. With that base, Dialogflow can connect new phrases from users with the closest intents very confidently. We can never really assume that we will know every way that our users will speak for every intention. So that's where leveraging Google's NLU capability really helps us out. So basically, it helps categorizing user intentions. Say, for example, we had looked at a hair salon example. Let's assume that scheduling an appointment is one of the user's intentions. So you can create a separate intent for scheduling appointments. And the second intention of the visitor is to ask you for your salon's working hours. So you can create another separate intent for that purpose as well. So this is how you categorize user intentions inside your intents. For example, you could create a weather agent that recognizes and responds to end user questions about the weather. You would likely define an intent for questions about the weather forecast, and if an end user says what's the forecast, Dialogflow will match that end user expression to the forecast intent. You can also define your intent to extract useful information from the end user expression, like a time or location for the desired weather forecast. So this extracted data is important for your system to perform a weather query for the end user. So a basic intent contains the following: training phrases, which are examples of what end users might say. When an end user expression resembles one of these phrases, Dialogflow will match the intent. You don't have to define every possible example again, because Dialogflow's built-in machine learning expands on your list with other similar phrases. Then it has an action that you can define for each intent. So when an intent is matched, Dialogflow will provide the action to your system, and you can use the action to trigger certain actions defined in your system. Then there are parameters, and you have responses. So you define text, speech, or visual responses to return to the end user. These may provide the end user with answers, ask the end user for more information, or terminate the conversation. So there are also complex intents that can contain the following. They have contexts that are similar to natural language context. So if a person says to you, they are orange, you need context in order to understand what the person is referring to, right? Similarly, for Dialogflow to handle an end user expression like that, it needs to be provided with context in order to correctly match an intent. And then they have events, using which you can invoke an intent based on something that has happened instead of what an end user communicates. Then there are intents that are triggered if the user's intent does not match with any other intents. These are called as the fallback intents. Every agent comes with a default fallback intent, and you can add follow-up fallback intents if you need them. All right. So running back to our hair salon example, let's assume we have an intent called check services, and I'm going to define training phrases for this intent. Like, what services do you offer? How many services do you offer? So I'm going to add different invocations of the same question, at least 10 different invocations for the bot to get trained for it. And for schedule appointment intent, I can say I'd like to get a haircut on Saturday. When can I fix an appointment? Are there any free slots? So I'm going to keep feeding training phrases like these. And for Salon working hours, training phrases like, are you open during weekends, what are Salon working hours, what time do you work every day, etc. So let me show you how to create an intent inside Dialogflow. So get back to your Dialogflow portal and click on create intent. So you will have to give your intent a name and add training phrases. All right. So these training phrases are examples of what end users might say. For each intent, you can create as many training phrases as you want to. When an end user expression resembles one of these phrases, Dialogflow will match the intent. For example, the training phrase, what services do you offer, trains your agent to recognize end user expressions that are similar to that phrase. Say, what are your salon's services, or just services offered, etc. So you don't have to define every possible example, because like I said, Dialogflow's built-in machine learning expands on your list with other similar phrases. So let me add more training phrases. So remember that each intent that you define is for a separate functionality. So based on the responses that come from your visitor's side, the Dialogflow engine will look for an intent inside the platform and will provide responses accordingly. So you can define as many different intents as you want to, each representing a separate functionality. So I can keep adding training phrases like these. All right. So the more the number of training phrases, the more trained the bot will be. So while building an agent, you can control how data is extracted by annotating separate parts of your training phrases and configuring the associated parameters. So for these, we have features called actions and parameters in Dialogflow. So the action field is a simple convenience field that assists in executing the logic of your service. So when you're building an agent, you can set this field to any text you find useful. When an intent is matched at runtime, Dialogflow provides the action value to your fulfillment webhook request or the API interaction response. All right. So this can be used to trigger specific logic in your services. And then you have parameters. So when an intent is matched at runtime, Dialogflow provides the extracted values from the end user's expression as parameters. Each parameter has a type that is called the entity type, which dictates exactly how the data is extracted. Unlike raw end user input, parameters are properly structured data that can be easily used to perform some logic or to generate responses. So like I already said, when you build the agent, you can control how the data is extracted by annotating parts of your training phrases and configuring the associated parameters. So we have 3 sample sentences here, 3 sample invocations. The first one, what is the forecast today in Philadelphia? The second one, what will the weather be like in Toronto on Saturday? And the third one, is it going to rain tomorrow in Seattle? All right, so we have 3 different sentences, and I'll tell you how these have been annotated. So here, today is highlighted in orange, and it has been assigned to an entity called system.date. All right, so the parameter name here will be date, and the entity will be at system.date. You already have certain predefined entities inside Dialogflow that you can assign to your annotated values. And then we have Philadelphia and Toronto. All right. So today and Saturday and tomorrow are going to be classified as system.date entities. And then there's Philadelphia, Toronto, and Seattle that are going to be named with location and assigned to system.geocity entity. All right. So let me show you how to annotate training phrases in real time. Let's go back to our Dialogflow console. So here we are inside our console, and we have an intent called check services, and we have some training phrases here. All right. So I'm going to try and annotate a part of this training phrase. All right. So I'm going to highlight haircut and see if there's an entity that aligns with this. Right. I'll see if there's something called system.service. All right. So since there's no entity that aligns with this, I'm going to go ahead and create a new. All right. So I'm going to say So let's go back to our intent and highlight this again. So here it is. I'm just going to assign this entity to my highlighted or annotated part, all right? And I'm going to save. So let me show you how to add more action parameters. All right, we'll go to a different intent, schedule appointments. So there are already two parts that are annotated and assigned with action parameters. So let me just add some more user expressions and tell you how to annotate and add action parameters. Right. Do you see this? So here, as I add training phrases, they're automatically getting annotated and entities are being assigned to them. So again, this evening has been assigned to system time period, and this one to system date. This one again to system date period because it says this weekend, and this one again system date. That's how you assign action parameters to annotated parts of your training phrases. So under the action and parameters section, you will be able to see all of the parameter names and their corresponding entities inside a table. So we have discussed about entities so far. So what is entity extraction? So these entities are parts of the user's input that describe useful information that Dialogflow. So these entities are parts of the user input that describes useful information that Dialogflow can extract and perform an action with. So when the user speaks or types their request, Dialogflow will look for the entity, and the value of the given entity can be used within the request. For example, if the user says, I need to book an appointment for Saturday, I need to book an appointment on Saturday, the intent would be book an appointment, and the entity for the subject matter would be picked up as Saturday. So to define a new entity, you would head to the entity section in Dialogflow and define a group of related information that hold the same purpose in one entity. We had looked at that some time back. So Dialogflow already contains a set of predefined system entities like system date, system time period, etc., which can be used when constructing intents. If these are not enough, we also have the ability to define our own entities for use within our intents. That is, we have developer and user entities. So system entities are ready to use data buckets that help extract valuable information from ongoing conversations. Use system entities to get your clients' phone numbers, email addresses, URLs, and much more. So some basic examples are system date, time, color, location, etc. Then you have developer entities. They can and should be used for anything that is not covered by these system entities and should contain values that you expect from your users. So like training phrases, the more entities you provide, the more your agent will understand. So these entities allow for the mapping of synonyms to a reference value. You can create your own entities for your agent through web forms, uploading them in JSON or CSV formats or via API calls. Then you have user entities. These are called session entities. So they are defined on a session ID level, which allows for specific entities to be tied to a user and their own session. So this means that they extend or replace the developer entity at the user session level. So a user session is the conversation that they're having with your agent from start to finish. So these entities expire 10 minutes after a conversation, and they can be created programmatically using the Dialogflow API. Then you'll define responses that will be sent to your visitors. So these should be defined in such a way that they prompt users to provide inputs that will match any one of your intents. So there are two types of responses that you can define: text responses and custom payload. So intents have a built-in response handler that can return responses after the intent is matched. This feature only supports static responses, though you can use parameter references in these responses to make them a little dynamic. So this is helpful for recapping information that's provided by the end user. So for example, your intent response could look like, okay, I booked an appointment for you on so and so date. All right. In some cases, this is all you need. In case where your code needs to take some action or build a more dynamic response, you should use one of the dynamic response options. So agents typically use a combination of static and dynamic responses. So the basic response is or text response. Other responses are also available, like image, audio, etc., some of which are platform specific. So if you define more than one response variation for your intent, your agent will select one response at random. Say for example, you have 10 responses defined. So this agent is going to choose one response from the 10 at random. You should add several response variations to make your agent more conversational. So when building an agent, you should provide response data for each and every intent separately. When you use the API or fulfillment to interact with Dialogflow, you technically may not need to provide response data, but both of these methods can dynamically generate any response. However, if you want to use the simulator for testing or defining intents that have a simple response, you should provide response data. As a general rule, your intent responses should prompt the end user to provide an expression that will match another intent. Your responses should also guide the end user to provide specific data. So text responses are responses that your bot service will send back to the user when an intent is matched. It's good to confirm the intent in the response so that the user can see that the bot indeed understood what they said. So you can add variant responses to the one intent if you want to give a slightly different experience each time. Then Dialogflow is going to choose one at random, like I had already mentioned. If you want multiple separate messages in the same output, you can do that by adding text response modules. This is where you can make your bot more conversational. So add many different responses in the intent section to make your bot absolutely conversational. This way your customers won't feel like they're talking to a bot, although they know they're talking to one, all right? And then you have custom payload. So Dialogflow allows the use of not only plain text responses, but also rich text responses like images, suggestions, sliders, links, etc. You can use SalesIQ's input and display cards inside the custom payload section of Dialogflow. So you will find predefined Zobot messaging formats inside our developer documentation. I will show you them shortly. You can use these for custom payloads. To take advantage of a channel's unique messaging capabilities, you can add that in the responses section by selecting the plus icon. Let me take you to the portal again, all right? So you can do so by clicking on the plus icon, and you can choose the platforms that you want to. And you can also select to have these channel specific responses take over the standard response or to be added after the total output. So channel specific responses usually include easy to use rich UI messaging types that include elements such as buttons, cards, and images. So here inside the schedule appointments for the hair salon intent, a text response has been added, all right? So here we are going to be using a combination of both text responses and custom payload. So there's one text response that says, please choose a preferred date. I can also add variants here, all right? I can say choose a date. So I can keep adding as many response variants as I want to, and every time Dialogflow is going to choose, the agent is going to choose one response at random, all right? So then I'm adding some custom payload. So this one right here is the calendar widget of SalesIQ scripts, all right? So we have predefined scripts inside our help documentation that I'll show you in a minute. You can find these inside our developer documentation, all right? So I'm just going to scroll down to calendar. So you have separate code snippets for each platform that is available to build your Zobot. So the Dialogflow platform code snippet is right here. So this can be just directly copy pasted inside this section. All right, so that's all you have to do to use input and display cards in Dialogflow's custom payload. All right, so then you finally click on save. So as a result of this, this text response along with the calendar widget is going to be displayed to the visitor at runtime. So we had already looked at one of these widgets in our demos earlier. Then we have fulfillment. So if you're using one of the integration options and your agent needs more than static intent responses, you need to use fulfillment to connect your service to your agent. So connecting your service always allows you to take actions based on end user expressions and send dynamic responses back to the end user. So here there are two options that you can use. You have webhooks, or you have the inline editor inside fulfillments. For example, if an end user wants to schedule a haircut on Friday, your service can check your database and respond to the end user with availability information for Friday. So each intent has a setting to enable fulfillment. If an intent requires some action by your system or dynamic response, you shall enable fulfillment for the intent. So if an intent without fulfillment enabled is matched, then Dialogflow will use the static response that you had defined for the intent. So when an intent with fulfillment enabled is matched, Dialogflow sends a request to your webhook service with information about the matched intent, and then your system can perform any required action and respond to Dialogflow with information about how to proceed. So this is the process flow. So the end user types or speaks an expression, and then Dialogflow will match the end user expression to an intent and extracts parameters. Dialogflow sends a webhook request message to your webhook service. This message contains information about the matched intent, the action, parameters, and also the response that was defined for the intent. Your service performs actions as needed, like database queries or external API calls. Your service then sends a webhook response message to Dialogflow. This message contains the response that should be sent to the end user. Then Dialogflow sends the response to the end user, and the end user sees or hears the response. So coming back to our Dialogflow portal, let's navigate to fulfillment. So here you have two different options. You have webhooks and you have inline editors. So you can, to use fulfillment, you need to set up a webhook. So a webhook is basically a web server endpoint that you can create and host. When an intent with fulfillment enabled is matched, Dialogflow will make an HTTP post request to your webhook with a JSON object containing information about the matched intent. And after receiving the request, this webhook will perform any required task. For example, it might use the information from the request to look up a product in a database or place an order, or in our case, fix an appointment. Finally, this webhook should respond back with instructions for what Dialogflow should do next. So for the webhook, you will need basic authentication with login and password, and authentication with additional authentication headers. So if your webhook doesn't require any authentication, then you can leave the authentication fields blank. You also have to note that your webhook must use HTTPS and the URL must be publicly accessible. So Dialogflow has an inline editor in the console that will let you directly write Node.js code, which can then be deployed to run as a webhook on Firebase. Here we'll define responses in the editor for each intent separately as functions, inside which we can set the following responses for an agent. This can either be text, card, suggestions, or custom payload. Here custom payload is platform specific. Since SalesIQ is not supported directly, you have to mention platform unspecified. So let me show you some example sample code. All right. So do you see this? So platform unspecified has been mentioned here because SalesIQ is not supported directly. So you can just copy paste this sample code and put it inside, all right? And then you can make changes as per your requirements. So inside this code, the function set is called a map object, that is the intent map. So this will link an intent to a specific function in the code. It's basically going to establish a mapping between the intent and the function that you have defined. And then you need to click on deploy. So that's how you configure fulfillment for your agent from the fulfillment page. So you can build and deploy webhooks using your preferred development environment or use the inline code editor. So Dialogflow also provides two out-of-the-box features that help you get started with agent and conversation design. You have pre-built agents and small talk. So pre-built agents are a collection of agents developed by the Dialogflow team that are aimed at covering specific use cases. So they can be used to establish a base for building conversations that cover specific topics like dining out, hotel booking, and navigation. So these agents, they include intents and entities that cover the agent's topic. You need to provide responses since they may depend on particular use cases or need to be retrieved from external sources. So importing a pre-built agent creates a new agent. If you want to include pre-built agent functionality into an existing agent, you'll need to move the intents from the newly created pre-built agent into your existing agent. And then you have small talk that is used to provide responses to casual conversations. This feature can greatly improve user experience by covering common questions that may not pertain to your agent's intents you built. So small talk can either be enabled for your agent or imported as a pre-built agent. So once enabled, these responses can be customized to fit your branding or your product needs. So each response category is organized in folders, all right? So there's courtesy, there's emotions, and there's about user, and a lot of other categories. So you need to remember that responses for the Smalltalk agent are only supported in English, Russian, French, and Italian at this time. So now that we're done with configuring all of the features inside the Dialogflow platform, we'll now move on to the SalesIQ platform and look at how to integrate the bot agents that we have created with Zoho SalesIQ Zobot. So for that, we'll navigate back into our SalesIQ portal. So once the bot agent is created in Dialogflow, it'll be reflected inside your Zobot dashboard. So if you have more than one bot agent, they'll appear in the drop-down and you can choose one among them. So you can click on the refresh button to get the updated agent list from Dialogflow. Following that, we will have to start configuring trigger responses. So once you're done creating your bot agent, you will have to configure responses that you want to trigger to your visitors. You can configure them only in the JSON format. In case you've configured multiple languages, you will have to choose the language first, and then you can configure language-based responses. The messages can either be in the form of free text, suggestions, input cards, or display cards. You'll have a bunch of these pre-built responses inside our user guide as well. So you can copy paste these responses right from the developer guides and make minor changes to them, or you can use them as such. So you have text messages, text and input cards, text and display cards, and so much more. Then you need to configure action failure responses. So these action failure responses are those responses that will be displayed to your website visitors in case any one of the requested actions have failed. So you can define responses for messages that come in after standard business hours, when operators are not available, or when operators do not exist, or the maximum character limit has been reached. So once you're done configuring all of these, you need to click on Save. So you can access the Dialogflow console right from your Zobot dashboard. And you can review all of the changes that you make to your Zobot here, right here in the preview window itself. All right, so every time you make a change, you need to refresh the preview window for the changes to reflect. You can also take a look at how your conversations are going to look inside your website. You can preview them entirely inside your preview window itself. You can see how each flow works and what widgets are going to be displayed. And then dynamic text. So the text that can change is termed as dynamic text. Messages will be conveyed dynamically from one visitor to another as mentioned in the defined rule. So the dynamic text is usually populated by using the percentage symbol typed along with the message. So Zoho SalesIQ supports dynamic text in Dialogflow responses, and so you can use the dynamic text inside your trigger messages and your chat responses. So these are some examples of very commonly used dynamic text in Dialogflow responses: visitor name, visitor ID, visitor country, company name, email, etc., etc. So you have a huge list of dynamic text responses that you can use. You can check them out as well inside our developer documentation. I'll show you how to set up dynamic text now. Let's go back to our portal. So I'll show you how to set up dynamic responses inside your trigger message. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Edit. So here is my trigger response. All right, so I have a plain text response configured here. So I'm going to add some dynamic text to this to spice it up a little bit. So I'm going to say hello there, and I'm going to try and greet my visitors with their name. So I'm just going to use visitor.name. All right, it's always populated using a percentage symbol, and I'm going to click on save. Now let me go ahead and change the name of the visitor. Let me say Michelle and save. I'm going to refresh. So do you see this? This is how your visitors will be greeted. So this will turn out to be a personalized chat invite that's going to attract more visitors into buying your products or visiting your hair salon or anything as such. So you can find all of the dynamic text that you can use inside our developer documentation. So you have all of these. So you can choose any one of them, and you can use them inside your responses. So visitors also have the option of uploading files in Dialogflow, files like images, text, documents, etc. So while uploading a file to the Dialogflow bot, a text message that says the file has been uploaded successfully will be sent to Dialogflow. These files will be saved in the chat history inside the SalesIQ portal, but they cannot be uploaded, and they will not be uploaded to Dialogflow. The downloadable URL of the files only will be passed to Dialogflow. No text will be displayed inside the chat window, and the text won't be sent based on the language. So the user basically needs to handle the file upload intent based on the text response. Passing visitor info and attachment. So visitor information will be passed on to Dialogflow for framing a response based on visitor information like their name, the region that they come from, etc. So while processing the intent response inside fulfillment, the values will be available inside the parameters object. So here two objects will be received. The first one, you can retrieve the visitor information that is mentioned. And the second one, if the visitor attaches a file during a bot conversation, it will be available inside this object. Otherwise, an empty array will be passed. So now we've come to the end of our webinar. So let me give you a quick recap of what we had covered. All right. So first, we had logged into Dialogflow to create a bot agent. And after the bot agent was created, we had mapped the bot agent here inside our SalesIQ portal. So if you have more than one bot agents, you will have to choose one from the drop down that is available here. All right. So the agent that you had created inside your Dialogflow portal and the agent that you have mapped inside Zoho SalesIQ must be the same for your bot to function on the website. And following that, we had configured trigger responses, and then we had accessed the Dialogflow console to set up intents for our bot agent. And inside each intent, we had configured training phrases, and we had annotated the training phrases to assign action and parameters. And then we had also added responses, plain text responses and custom payload. We had looked at what entities were and how to create new entities and assign them to annotated parts of your training phrases, and then how to configure fulfillments using webhooks and inline editors. So in case you have more queries with respect to the same, you can check out our developer documentation or write back to us at support@zohosalesiq.com, and make sure you follow us on Twitter for more updates on our features. So I'll see you in the next webinar. Until then, happy Zobotting.